The walls of Buckingham Palace have witnessed centuries of royal declarations, but nothing prepared Britain for what King Charles unleashed in his latest address. This was not a ceremonial speech, nor a polite acknowledgement of duty. It landed like a detonation, shaking the monarchy to its very core. Within moments of his words, headlines across the nation screamed with shock. Commentators scrambled for meaning, and social media transformed into a battlefield. Catherine, the radiant Princess of Wales, was thrust into the light like never before, while Camilla, the Queen Consort, crowned at Charles's side, seemed suddenly cast into the shadows. You could almost hear the collective gasp. For millions of viewers, this wasn't just rhetoric, it was a public power shift, a crown subtly sliding from one head to another in the realm of perception. And you know what? If you ask me, it felt less like Charles was speaking to his subjects and more like he was firing a shot across the bow of his own household. The man who waited a lifetime for the throne now seemed willing to wield it as a weapon. The brilliance, or perhaps the danger, was in his subtlety. Charles praised Catherine not simply as a dutiful princess, but as a figure central to the monarchy's future, a stabilizing force, a cornerstone of continuity. Such phrasing carries immense weight. It was as though he was anointing her with public legitimacy, the kind that no crown or ceremony could bestow. Meanwhile, Camilla's role was reduced to perfunctory acknowledgement, a silence that echoed louder than applause. A striking microfact adds to the drama. In a 2022 YouGov poll, Catherine was ranked among Britain's top 3 most admired women, while Camilla struggled to make the top 20. That statistic suddenly seemed prophetic, reverberating through Charles's words. Picture the scene: flashing cameras illuminating Catherine's composed smile, Camilla's stiff expression betraying tension, reporters whispering in the press gallery. It wasn't just a speech, it was a royal earthquake, and like any earthquake, the aftershocks would be far more destructive than the first tremor. But to understand why this moment hit like thunder, we must first step back into the palace corridors, into the history of rivalries and reputations that made this speech inevitable. To grasp the gravity of King Charles's words, we need to rewind the royal story and revisit the decades of tension that shaped this moment. The monarchy has always thrived on image, an institution built as much on perception as on power. Every smile, every wave, every carefully staged photo tells a story. And behind those stories are rivalries that rarely fade. And in this tale, 2 women stand at the heart of the struggle: Camilla, Queen Consort by title, and Catherine, Princess of Wales by affection. Camilla's journey to the throne was anything but smooth. For years, she was the shadow in Charles's life, the woman painted as the rival to Diana, the beloved people's princess. When Diana died tragically in 1997, public sentiment hardened. Many Britons saw Camilla as a usurper, the source of scandal that tarnished the fairy tale. By the time she married Charles in 2005, the monarchy had worked tirelessly to rehabilitate her image. Yet even when she finally sat beside him as Queen Consort, the cheers were polite at best, not thunderous. If you ask me, it always felt as though her crown was heavier than gold. It carried decades of resentment. Catherine, in contrast, was everything the monarchy needed after years of turmoil. A university sweetheart who married Prince William in 2011, she embodied the fairy tale reborn. A middle-class girl turned royal, she projected warmth and stability. She smiled easily, raised her children with visible devotion, and worked on causes like early childhood development that resonated with the public. Importantly, she had no scandal trailing behind her. She was a clean slate on which Britons could write their hopes for the future. Numbers back up this emotional divide. In a 2022 YouGov survey, Catherine ranked among the top 3 most admired women in Britain, while Camilla barely cracked the top 20. Those aren't just statistics, they are proof of how hearts have aligned. In the chessboard of monarchy, popularity is as potent as any title. Visually, the contrast was striking. Catherine dazzled at public engagements, commanding headlines with her poise. Photographs of her in glittering gowns dominated front pages, while Camilla, despite her official rank, often slipped to the inside pages. Royal commentators whispered of the imbalance. Catherine's elegance seemed effortless, while Camilla's charm felt defensive, as though she was always playing catch-up. History only sharpened the comparison. Edward VIII gave up his crown for Wallis Simpson, a love affair that scandalized the world. Diana's story still haunts every discussion of Camilla. And now, as Catherine rose in prominence, the echoes of those past dramas reverberated. Once again, Britain was faced with the question, who deserves to embody the crown in the hearts of the people? Inside the palace, the atmosphere was no less charged. On paper, Camilla was the queen consort, her title unassailable. But perception is survival in monarchy, and Catherine's star was blazing too brightly to ignore. Every engagement she attended, every speech she delivered seemed to outshine Camilla. Charles himself leaned into this reality, often spotlighting Catherine as the monarchy's modern face, a bridge to the future, while Camilla became continuity in name only. The stage was set. Two women bound to the king stood as symbols of two possible monarchies, one weighed down by history, tolerated rather than adored, and another fresh, youthful, and adored by millions. It was only a matter of time before the ground beneath this delicate balance began to tremble. And tremble it did. Subtle signals soon emerged, small enough to overlook at first, but loud enough to spark whispers among those paying attention. Long before Charles set off a political earthquake with his speech, sharp-eyed observers noticed the tremors. The monarchy's choreography is precise to the second. Who stands where? Who speaks when? Who wears what jewel? Any deviation from the script can ripple louder than a thunderclap. And in the months leading up to the king's explosive words, the choreography began to change. It started with the calendar. Catherine was suddenly present at engagements that once belonged to Camilla. A lavish state banquet for visiting dignitaries, traditionally the stage for the queen consort, saw Catherine dazzling in a gown that dominated the next day's front pages. Camilla was there too, yes, but she was relegated to the background in photos, her presence overshadowed by Catherine's effortless glow. Then came a mini-climax that electrified public conversation. Catherine representing the monarchy at an international climate summit in Scotland. Cameras captured her shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers, her speeches praised for clarity and conviction. The glaring absence of Camilla was noticed instantly. Commentators asked what many were already whispering. Had Catherine begun to step into Camilla's space? If you ask me, the optics didn't just suggest it, they shouted it. The press fueled the fire. Tabloids splashed images of Catherine in designer gowns and wrote breathless commentary about her rising influence. A columnist went so far as to call her the monarchy's true jewel, a phrase that ricocheted across social media. Meanwhile, Camilla was subjected to unflattering comparisons. Every smile of Catherine became a symbol of hope. Every glance of Camilla was dissected as insecurity, and the numbers told their own story. During the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, a YouGov poll found Catherine's approval ratings soaring above 65%, while Camilla's languished around 30%. That's not just a gap, it's a chasm. In a monarchy that depends on symbolic legitimacy, such disparity doesn't simply reflect public opinion, it threatens stability itself. Even inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Staffers hinted at an unease radiating from Camilla. One anecdote spread like wildfire. At a garden party, a photographer captured Camilla casting a sidelong glance at Catherine, an expression somewhere between envy and exasperation. The photo turned viral, dissected on Twitter and Instagram, with captions that ranged from biting humor to outright mockery. In the digital age, perception hardens into reality faster than ever. Charles himself didn't help quell the storm. He praised Catherine often, calling her a pillar of stability and a modernizing force for the monarchy. Such compliments, while diplomatically appropriate, stood in stark contrast to the perfunctory nods he gave Camilla. Royal commentators noticed. They wondered if Charles was quietly shifting the spotlight toward the daughter-in-law adored by millions rather than the queen who shared his throne. As these moments accumulated, the inevitability of a coming showdown grew. This wasn't a matter of isolated appearances or random scheduling. These were calculated moves, or at least, that's how they appeared. Catherine was no longer being presented as William's supportive wife. She was being framed as the monarchy's living future. I'll admit, the more I pieced together these subtle signs, the more it felt like tectonic plates grinding beneath Buckingham's marble floors. You can ignore small rumbles for a time, but eventually, the quake hits. And the public only ever sees the surface, the handshakes, the glances, the photos. What they didn't see, what was happening in whispered meetings and late-night strategy sessions, was even more telling. Because behind the palace doors, where cameras are forbidden and curtains drawn tight, the rumblings were far more dangerous. Rivalries were sharper, stakes higher, and loyalties tested. The monarchy was preparing for a storm, and it was about to burst into the open. The polished smiles and glittering tiaras of royal life have always hidden a harsher truth. The palace is a battleground of influence, strategy, and survival. In the months before Charles's seismic speech, the whispers behind closed doors were louder than ever. What the cameras showed polished appearances, choreographed ceremonies was only the surface. Beneath, the tectonic plates of royal power were grinding, and insiders knew an eruption was inevitable. Leaked tidbits began to drip into the press, painting a picture of palace politics at its most ruthless. Court insiders described planning meetings where Camilla's input seemed increasingly brushed aside. Her suggestions for charitable priorities reportedly went unheard, while Catherine's initiatives were not only approved but celebrated. Staff members confided to journalists that the palace communications team deliberately angled coverage to spotlight Catherine. Her warm smiles with children, her sharp speeches, her elegant fashion moments. Camilla, though present, was literally cropped out of the frame. If you ask me, this wasn't a coincidence. Charles and his advisors understood one unshakable truth: popularity is power. In a monarchy where perception keeps the institution afloat, Catherine was the golden card. Camilla, still struggling against decades of baggage, couldn't match it. A micro-fact underscores the divide. The Times once reported that after Queen Elizabeth II's passing, senior advisors debated who should act as the monarchy's soft power ambassador. Their answer was almost unanimous: Catherine. She had the relatability, the grace, and the modern touch needed to secure the crown's future. Camilla's name was barely mentioned. Inside the palace's marble halls, these preferences weren't lost on anyone. Camilla, who had spent years painstakingly rehabilitating her image, once again felt the ground shifting beneath her. One anecdote from a staffer described a charity gala where Catherine's team received direct approval from Charles for seating arrangements, while Camilla's aides were left scrambling with last-minute changes. A minor detail, perhaps, but in the coded language of palace life, it spoke volumes. Family dynamics only made matters more combustible. William's devotion to Catherine was absolute, reinforcing her image as the steady heartbeat of the monarchy's future. At family gatherings, Catherine's warmth with George, Charlotte, and Louis made her appear as the natural matriarch in waiting. Camilla, though cordial, never radiated the same effortless connection. The comparison, however unfair, grew sharper with every photograph and every anecdote. Then came a mini-climax that set royal watchers ablaze. Whispers that Charles himself had referred to Catherine as the monarchy's brightest asset. Whether the phrase was genuine or gossip, it exploded across headlines, fueling speculation that the king saw his daughter-in-law as indispensable, perhaps even more than his own queen. The line went viral, becoming a meme, a rallying cry, and an unspoken dagger aimed at Camilla's authority. The media amplified the tension, framing the narrative as Catherine the future versus Camilla the now. Social media picked it up with glee, hashtags trending globally that pitted the two women against each other. One viral meme depicted Catherine stepping into a spotlight while Camilla faded into the background. It was exaggerated, yes, but in the digital age, exaggeration often becomes reality. Historical parallels made the whispers sting even more. Diana had once been the adored outsider, the public's princess, while Camilla wore the cloak of villainy. Now, decades later, Catherine seemed to embody Diana's legacy of grace and devotion, while Camilla found herself cast once more in the role of tolerated interloper. The ghost of the past was haunting the present, yet not everyone within the palace agreed with this reading. Some royal commentators argued that Charles was merely modernizing, spreading responsibilities more evenly across family members. They suggested Catherine's visibility was strategic, a way to prepare her for her eventual role without undermining Camilla. But the more cautious voices were drowned out by the thunder of perception. Catherine was ascending, Camilla was slipping. And so, the whispers swelled into a chorus. Power in the monarchy doesn't shift with one glance or one sentence. It builds slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one moment makes the change undeniable. That moment came when Charles finally stood before the world and delivered his address. The private rumblings became public thunder, and in a single speech, the palace's internal struggle was broadcast across the globe. For months, the tension had been building, but nothing could compare to the eruption that came when King Charles took the podium. It was supposed to be a ceremonial address, the kind of speech the monarchy delivers dozens of times a year, carefully worded, polite, forgettable. But this time, Charles' words were charged with dynamite. He began with a measured tone, thanking the nation for its continued loyalty, nodding to tradition. Yet within minutes, his language shifted, and the explosion began. He praised Catherine not simply as the Princess of Wales, but as a cornerstone of the monarchy's future. He lauded her ability to connect with the people, her tireless devotion to service, her steadying influence in times of turbulence. The room froze. Those in attendance felt the ground tilt beneath their feet, as if the king was quietly bestowing a crown of legitimacy upon his daughter-in-law. And then came the silence where Camilla's name should have been. The queen consort, the woman crowned beside him, was acknowledged only briefly and in the vaguest of terms. "My partner in service," he called her, nothing more. Compared to the glowing tributes for Catherine, the omission was deafening. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion. Catherine's serene composure, her eyes lowered with dignity, Camilla's smile tightening, her jaw set. Those images flooded news sites within minutes. If you ask me, it was a coronation in all but name. Charles had not just praised Catherine, he had elevated her, making her the embodiment of continuity and stability, while Camilla was left standing in the shadow of her own crown. The reaction was immediate and ferocious. Social media exploded with hashtags. Future Queen Catherine trended globally, alongside memes contrasting Catherine's radiant calm with Camilla's visible discomfort. Headlines were relentless. The Daily Mail declared, "Charles signals new era. Catherine the power behind the throne." The Guardian speculated on whether the king had intentionally sidelined his own queen. BBC pundits debated late into the night. Was this a calculated move or an accidental slight with catastrophic implications? A microfact highlights the scale of the impact. Within 24 hours, Google searches for Catherine surged across the UK, surpassing even searches for King Charles himself. For a royal figure to eclipse the monarch so dramatically was unprecedented and telling. For Camilla, the fallout began instantly. Analysts dissected every frame of her expression, speculating whether she felt betrayed, humiliated, or resigned. Royal biographers whispered about whether Charles had clipped her wings deliberately, tethering his legacy instead to the woman adored by millions. Editorial cartoons depicted her crown slipping, while fan edits crowned Catherine in her place. Charles, however, offered no clarifications. He did not soften his words, did not release a statement to temper speculation. He let the storm rage unchecked, as though signaling that the monarchy had chosen its face of the future, and it wasn't the woman crowned as queen. The visual spectacle only fueled the fire. Imagine the cameras flashing, dignitaries watching stiffly, as the queen consort's smile faltered, Catherine glowing like the centerpiece of the royal stage. It wasn't just a speech, it was a seismic shift, history bending in real time. And yet, as with any detonation, the debris was only beginning to fall. The speech had reshaped the narrative, but it left behind fractures in public opinion, in palace unity, and perhaps even in Charles's own marriage. The blow-up had happened. Now Britain braced for the wreckage, the fallout that would test not just Camilla's resolve, but the monarchy's fragile balance. The morning after King Charles's address, Britain awoke to a monarchy transformed. It wasn't scandal in the sense of misbehavior or leaked secrets, it was something subtler and far more destabilizing. The king himself had redrawn the palace's power map, and the ripples touched every corner of the realm. For Camilla, the impact was brutal. Tabloid headlines screamed with merciless clarity. Camilla overshadowed, queen in name only. Editorial cartoons showed her crown tilting precariously, while Catherine's smile lit up the page. Even her staunchest defenders in the press struggled to explain away the imbalance in Charles's words. If you ask me, the silence from Camilla's circle spoke louder than any denial. The woman who had finally clawed her way into acceptance was suddenly eclipsed, her authority challenged not by scandal but by adoration for another. Catherine, meanwhile, became the heroine of the story. She didn't campaign for the spotlight, at least not openly, but the public thrust it upon her. Within hours, hashtags like #Queen Catherine Now and #People's Queen dominated Twitter. Instagram was flooded with edits of her in coronation robes, a queen in waiting made queen in hearts. A microfact sharpens the picture. Just 2 days after the speech, a video clip of Catherine greeting children at a charity event racked up over 10 million views on YouTube. That number dwarfed coverage of Camilla entirely, cementing Catherine's place as the monarchy's golden star. Inside Buckingham Palace, the tension was palpable. Staff whispered of strained encounters, Camilla retreating from the spotlight, Catherine's schedule expanding with new engagements. At one state function, Catherine was seated prominently beside Charles, while Camilla's placement seemed almost symbolic of her diminished role. The cameras noticed, the public noticed, and the narrative tightened its grip. Catherine was rising, Camilla was sinking. Even Charles himself seemed to lean into the shift, smiling broadly when Catherine spoke, nodding in approval as though publicly endorsing her role. He let the symbolism hang heavy in the air. For the monarchy, which thrives on subtle signals, this was less strategy and more revelation. Public opinion crystallized quickly. Polling organizations rushed to capture the mood, and the results were damning. Catherine's favorability soared towards 70%, while Camilla's dipped below 30%. These numbers weren't just statistics, they were a referendum. In a constitutional monarchy where legitimacy rests as much on love as on law, the implications were seismic. And then came the historical echoes. Diana's ghost lingered in every comparison. Commentators drew lines between Catherine's public adoration and Diana's timeless popularity, framing her as the continuation of the princess who had once captured the world. Others reached further back, evoking Elizabeth I and her rivals, noting how female power within the crown has always been contested, fragile, and dramatic. If you ask me, it was déjà vu with a modern twist. The monarchy had seen rivals before, but never in an age of viral memes and 24-hour news cycles. Catherine was no longer just William's wife, she was a symbol, a future queen crowned in the court of public opinion. Camilla, despite her title, seemed relegated to a supporting role in her own story. Yet even as the dust settled, bigger questions emerged. Would Camilla accept her diminished standing quietly? Or would she fight to reclaim authority? Would Charles' marriage withstand the fractures created by his own words? And what of William and Catherine? Were they prepared for the burden of being the monarchy's central figures sooner than expected? The monarchy had crossed a line it could not retreat from. The fallout was here, and it was rewriting history. But the most pressing question remained: what happens next? The storm unleashed by King Charles's words has not passed, it lingers, echoing through palace corridors and across the British press. Catherine's star now blazes brighter than ever, while Camilla's crown feels heavier with each headline that questions her standing. The monarchy insists on unity, parading polished smiles and rehearsed gestures. But the public sees the cracks. Britain cannot unhear the speech, nor unsee the images of Catherine elevated, while Camilla slipped quietly into the shadows. And if you ask me, this isn't the end, it's the opening chapter of a new royal drama. Catherine, once framed as the dutiful princess, now stands as the people's queen in waiting. Camilla, officially crowned but symbolically diminished, faces the prospect of fighting for relevance in a court that seems to be shifting under her feet. Meanwhile, Charles himself has set into motion a power dynamic that could define his reign more than any policy or proclamation. A microfact makes the stakes clearer. Queen Elizabeth II once declared, "The monarchy must evolve or it will fail." Was Charles following her wisdom by elevating Catherine? Or has he cracked the foundation by undermining his own queen? That question now haunts not just the palace but the nation. So we stand at the edge of a cliff. Will Catherine's rise reshape the monarchy into something modern and adored? Will Camilla retreat, resist, or retaliate? And how will history judge a king who detonated his own house with a single speech? Stay with us, because this saga is only beginning, and the next chapter promises to be even more explosive.